Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Art 196, Introduction to Web Design, Fall 2021. Today, we're going to be working on Lesson 5, which is beginning the basic structure of our website. Okay, it'll be the foundation for it. It shouldn't take that long to do, but it's important. Because if this basic structure or foundation for your website is inaccurate, you won't be able to add the necessary style sheets to customize it and make it look the way you want. Anyway, before I actually start with the lesson itself, what I want to make sure that everybody understands that when you're doing the lessons, that you need to use the lesson folder for your root folder. So to do that, remember I said you needed to go to site and you needed to create a new site. Once you've created that new site, then now I can go to manage sites. And you can see that I have a number of sites that I manage. I want Art 196. And I'm still using the one from spring 2021. Okay, so once I've created that that site, I can go back in now and I can manage that. The first thing that I want to do, and this will be true for every lesson that we do in here, is that we're going to have to make sure that you select whatever lesson we're working on as your root folder. Okay, so to do that, you click on this little folder here, little icon. You can see that I'm currently linked to lesson 5. But if I look at the folder with all of the lessons in it, I don't want to link to that one. Every lesson that we do, I want to make sure that I'm linking specifically to that lesson folder. There is a bit of redundancy in each of these. For example, when I twirl down, you'll see that it has its own CSS folder. It has an image folder. It has a JavaScript folder. It has a resource folder. And if I look at lesson 6, it looks almost identical, but they are considerably different. Everything, when you have a site and you're working on it, needs to be contained within that folder. Okay, it can't lie outside of the folder. Images can't lie outside of the folder. Style sheets can't lie outside of the folder. HTML pages cannot lie outside of that folder. So you need to make sure that when we're working on lesson 5, that it's linked to lesson 5. So I'll go ahead and I'll select choose. The next thing that you need to do every time you start a new lesson is then you need, where it says advanced settings, you need to twirl down. Where it says local info, this is where we link to our default image folder. So even if you have, as we're working on these lessons, the image folders will be identical in most cases from lesson to lesson to lesson, but you need to make sure that you link to the one that's located inside your root folder. So I'll click here and it says images and all will look good, but I need to make sure that I select the lesson 5 and I select the image folder contained inside lesson 5. Boom, now I can go ahead and select save. I'm done. Now, what's unique about this is that this only pertains every time we work on a new lesson, you need to create or select a different root folder. When you're working on your own root folder or your own website or a website for a client or friend or whatever, you never want to switch folders. You want to keep the folder intact and constant. That's why you would probably go back in and for every new website that you create, you go to site, new site, and then you create a root folder for it. It's just the lessons that we switch from folder to folder to folder and use each lesson as a separate root folder. So if you're not clear on that, please let me know. That's important. So what we have here for lesson 5 is a mock-up for the website that we will be building in the upcoming lessons. This was done in Photoshop. So if I click on any of these elements, it's just one image. If I switch from split view to code view, and we look inside the code, you can see that within the body tag itself, the opening tag and the closing tag, I just have an image and that's it. The width is 1150 pixels by 925. And that's for a large screen. That's kind of the default these days, about that size. Okay, so there's nothing in there. It's just to get us started. Now you can work with Dreamweaver these days from within Photoshop, and you can create your style sheets and you can build a page. But to do so, you have to, it requires more advanced knowledge of Photoshop. And because I don't require Photoshop as a prerequisite to this class, and I think it would be a good advanced class, that's why I'm not using the more current versions of the textbook. So if we go back now to split view and we look at it, and I know this sounds like I've mentioned this several times now, but we've decided that this is the layout that we're going to use. And the grid that you use to build up the foundation for your website is based on rows and columns. It's a basic kind of grid structure. So if we look at this, we can see that we have 1, 2, 3, and if I scroll down to the footer, 4 rows. And then if we look at this again and we decide how many columns we need, you'll notice that for the nav bar, we only need 1 column. For the header, we only need 1 column. For the main content, we need 3 columns, 1 for the asides to the left and to the right, and 1 for the main column or the main article in the middle. And then at the very bottom, again, we just need, for the footer, we need 1 row or 1 column, and that's it. Nothing more, nothing less. Okay, so having an understanding of just the rows and columns, what we're going to do next is this. It doesn't look like much, but we're going to build the basic structure in here. These are called divs. They're basically containers or little boxes that will contain either the navigation bar, the header, the footer, the main content, so on and so forth. That's what we will be constructing. So another thing that you should note, and if we look at, let's see, I'm going to look at the green, that's the mock-up. I want to look at my layout. This is what we will complete in lesson 7. Okay, so now we do have all of our structure in place. And we have we've filled it with the basic content that we will need to build our further pages. And what you should note is at the top here, you'll notice this little green bar, the blue bar, and the violet bar. Well, these, if we look at CSS Designer, are the media queries. So for a responsive website, we will be adding what are called media queries so that when your web page is rendered in a browser, it will resize properly, understanding what size screen it's being viewed on. So we would see this as a 3-column, okay, and for a large screen. And then it should work that when I go down to 2 and see this isn't the right one yet. When it goes down to, I mean, this would work, but it would look better if this dropped down to a 2-column for a tablet. And then when we go down to the phone, it goes down to a 1-column. And if I click here, I have to select and get this to work, but you get the basic idea that this resizes. That's what these guys do here. Now, if you want to create, use other templates that are available for us with Bootstrap, then what we can do is we can go to File, New, and we can see here that I can create a new document from here. I can create that HTML file that we did the second day of class, or it was the third day, I guess. If you want to create a CSS style sheet from scratch, you can do that. If you want to create PHP, XML, an HTML template, you name it, you can do that from here. I want to look at starter templates. Now, starter templates, what I want to look at here are the Bootstrap templates. It starts with basic templates, basic layouts, Bootstrap, email templates, and responsive starters. I want the Bootstrap. Bootstrap, for whatever reason, has become kind of the standard in these days. And you can see that we have 6 templates available for us as starter templates. You can also go online and you can find Bootstrap starter templates. So for example, if I wanted to create a portfolio page using Bootstrap as the foundation for my responsive website, I could do so, and I can go ahead and I could just click here and click create. Okay. And it looks pretty generic. Okay. It's broken down into the header. Well, actually the nav bar along the top. It's functional. Notice that it says nav bar, and we can go back in and we can edit all of this information. We can insert our own content, and we can add our own style sheet to take this sort of generic looking page and dress it up, make it look a little bit nicer. If you want to change the layout of the page, you can. It takes a bit of work, but you can see that they have, for example, for the images that will be put in here, that they tell you what size they are. Those are 400 by 400 pixel images. For the images down here, they will be 200 by 200. So you know what size you need when you're creating the content to replace the placeholders. Okay. So this is one way to go. What we're doing, though, is a little bit different. We're going to go ahead, instead of working with these templates, we're going to create our own template. So that's what we're going to start to do now. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to File, New. And I don't want to start our template. I just want to go a new document. And instead of where it says framework, the default says none, I'm going to select Bootstrap. I want to create, it says Bootstrap CSS. I want to create a new one, not an existing one. And what I want to do is I want to customize it. Now, one thing that you should note with the grid system is that by default, it's broken down into 12 columns. And you can use 1, 2, 4, 6, all the way up to 12 columns. But typically, most websites use 1, 2, 3, and maybe 4 tops with a gutter separation of maybe 30 pixels. I would leave the screen sizes alone as well. You can see for an extra large screen, it would be 1200 pixels wide. They don't specify depth because we just simply scroll up and down. And then for the smallest screen, which would be for a smartphone, that would be 576 pixels about. These are kind of the standards. If you need to change them, you can. For our lessons, we don't need to change them. Well, I'm going to go ahead and click create. Okay. Okay. Bootstrap 4 already exists. Do you want to override it? Sure. I'll go ahead and I'll click OK. Now, what I want to do, that's not what I wanted. I'm going to go back here. I'm going to close that. And let's try again. File, New. HTML, Bootstrap. I don't want to, let's see. I want to use new. I'm going to new document. We're not going to use the starter templates. We're not going to use the site templates. New, customize. I got that. Let's go ahead and create a new file from here and see what we get here. If it does the same thing. No, it's not doing it right. Let me close some of these, make sure that I am doing this correctly. Got that one. This is what I want when I'm done. So hold on here. I'm gonna go to File, New again. I just did this morning. Why is this to prepare for today's lecture? Why is it giving me fits? So I want new document, HTML, Bootstrap. I'm going to pause the recording for a minute to see what I'm doing wrong here. I'm not paying attention here. I'm going to go ahead and select new. I do want HTML. I want Bootstrap. I want to create new here. Notice that under design, it says there's a little checkbox, really teeny tiny type. Include a pre-built layout. I do not want that. I want to customize. And even though where I click customize, I'm leaving these settings alone, it's going to just give me basically a body tag and a blank page here. But it will be set up with the basic media queries that I'll need for a brand new page that adopts Bootstrap. So now I click OK. And we'll click OK. That's what I want. So you'll see that I have my basic media queries at the top. Okay, and if I click in here, you can see that I have a body tag, and that's it. That's all I want for today. Okay, a simple body tag. So it was, I wasn't paying attention. There where it says the little tiny checkbox that said, do you want a predefined layout? No, I don't, not for our lessons. If you want one yourself, in the future, then leave it checked. So what we're going to do now is we're going to break it down into 4 rows and then add the number of columns that we want. And then at the very end, probably one of the most important things will be to add the proper syntax so that in a later lesson, in lesson 6, when we begin to apply a custom style sheet, that we can override the existing kind of generic look and or appearance of our page and customize it with our own images and our own colors and our own fonts. So what I want to do now is make sure that the body tag is selected. So just by clicking on it, okay, you can do that. If you don't see that, if nothing is visible, then what we have down here is we have a tag selector. And you can see that I do have it selected. If I deselect, let's go back to HTML. And if this is what you see, then from over here in the lower right-hand corner, I can select the body tag from here and the DOM, D-O-M. Okay, I can also select the head of the document from here. I can also select the entire HTML opening all the way to the closing tag. I just want the body tag selected, and that's it. Okay, now what I want to do is at the top here is that under Insert, I want to make sure that the Insert tab is selected. With the Insert tab selected, then I want to make sure that I want to make sure that I have, it's the third one down, Bootstrap components selected. So the first thing that we're going to add is a basic container. The container, or as it used to be called, the wrapper, wraps around, it's all contained within the body tag, but it wraps around all of the content of our page. Then within that, we will add grid rows and columns. And once we've added the grid rows and columns, then we will add the proper syntax so that when we stylize it with our own custom style sheet, we'll be set to go. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and with the body tag selected, I'm going to double click where it says container. Okay. And it's added, and you can see where it says div container that now is contained within the body tag. Leave this selected. And now what I want to do is I want to add a row to this. And remember, understanding your layout, you have to go in order because that's also the way that the page will be loaded inside a browser. It starts at the top, to the left, and then downward. So I'm going to double click where it says grid and row. And by default, it says the number of columns is 3. Well, our first row is going to be for the nav bar. So remember I said we only need 1 column. Now it wants to know, where do you want it inserted? Before, after, or do you want it nested? Right now, I want it nested within the container. So I'm going to select nested and I click OK. There we go. There's our first row. This will be used for the nav bar. Now we're going to insert another row and column that will be used for the header. So I'm going to, with that, this one still selected, I'm going to go ahead and double click again on grid and row. This time I want it to be inserted after the one that I'll be using for the nav bar. And again, I only need 1 column. So I'll click OK. Now we have 2. Now we're ready to insert another one again, but the next one is where the main content of our page will be. And that's broken down into 3 columns. So I'll go ahead and I'll double click again for grid rows and columns. I want to leave it with 3 columns, and I want this also to be inserted after the previous one. And I'll click OK. Now you can see it's already broken down into 3 columns. And each of these columns are, remember I said the total number of units per column or per row is 12. So each of these are 4 units. Each of the single ones are 12 units. So now I have one more to add, which will be our 4th row, and this will be reserved for the footer. So I'm going to double click again, and I only need one column, and I want it inserted afterwards. Boom. So we're pretty much set to go. I'm going to go ahead and save this, and it will be saved inside my root folder. And the last thing that we need to do today, and then we'll be done, is we need to add the proper syntax to make sure that we can continue in the next lesson and style it properly. Syntax in using the correct HTML tags, and these will be HTML5 tags, are really, really important. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead now, and the book doesn't tell you to save it with this name, but just to let you know that the file name for the first page that loads in your website is index.html. Any page that loads after that, or that you want to load after that, can be named whatever you want. But the file name for the first page is always index.html. So, and that means when the host server is looking at the content of your root folder and it sees index.html, it knows that it will render that page, load that page and render it first. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to save it as index.html. We don't have any content for this, but it's okay for right now. Notice that it says untitled, and make sure that it is located in lesson 5. And I'll just name it index. Okay, save. There we go. So now I'm ready to add the correct syntax for each of these. So what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on the second row here and click on the div. Come on, being difficult here. So I want to select where I'm going to use the tag selector at the bottom here. I hope everybody can see this. But you can see that this is the order in which we've added these elements. We see the first one here. Over here is the body tag. The next to that is the div for the container. And now we have the div for the row. That's the one that I want to select. So with that selected, I should be able to, and you can see that it says div row. Well, I don't want a generic div to be used. This is where the header of our page will be. This is where we put the title of our page. This is where we put, we have a logo, we put that. If we have an image that we use that kind of ties together all of our pages, then that's where we're going to put that. So to edit this tag, we need to use what is called a tag editor. We can also do that from the code view if you want to. But to do that, I'm going to hit Command T. Okay. Or if you're on a PC, it will be Control T. And where it says div right here, I'm going to put in header, H-E-A-D-E-R, and hit the return key. Okay. And now notice instead of the generic div, it says header. That's all I need. Okay. Now I'm ready to click on the next row down here. And I don't want the first column, but I'm going to go down here and I'm going to use the tag selector again, because I don't want the div column 4 selected. I want the entire row to be selected. So now if I select that, and we have, again, div row, I want it to be in blue, not in the orange allows you to edit it. I want the entire row to be selected. What we will be using for this now will be the main, the syntax that we'll be using for this will be main. So I'm going to hit Command T again. And in place of div, I'll click in there, highlight that, go back and just type in main, all lowercase, hit the return key, and I'm good to go. And you'll notice that it has changed. Now what I need to do is we need to use the proper syntax for each of the columns. So I can either do that from here. I can select the div from here. And if it's difficult to select them, sometimes it is, then you'll notice over in the DOM over here, I can select it from here. Or if I want to select the middle one, or if I want to select the right one, I can select them from here as well. I want to select the left one. And again, instead of the generic div, this is going to be the correct syntax that we will be using for this will be aside, A-S-I-D-E. Okay, so that's just as you use the proper syntax in constructing sentences and paragraphs in an essay that you would write. You know, we end a sentence in a period. We end a question with a question mark. If we break a sentence up into parts, we might use commas, semicolons, or colons. The same holds true for this. The syntax has been determined by a body of experts. It's open source, but we do need to adhere to it in order for it to work. And as upgrades and updates change, then we need to kind of go with the flow and go with it. Otherwise, our pages won't be rendered properly in the browser. So I'm going to do what I had done before. For the others, I'm going to hit Command T. Come on, Command T. Command, there we go, Command T. And instead of div, I'm going to put aside. A-S-I-D-E. There we go, aside. Hit the return key and I'm good to go. Okay, so you'll notice in blue, or the little white text, but here for that column, that's the aside. I'll go ahead and I'll select the middle one from over here. And again, this one now for the correct syntax for the main content in the middle is called an article. We use an article tag for that. So I hit Command T once again. Command T, there we go. Instead of div, I'm going to write the word article. Okay, hit the return key, and I'm good to go. Why it's called these, I don't know. That's what, as I said, a group of professionals have decided that it needs to be. And now we want the right one again. That's going to be, again, the next one over here, div, but instead it's going to be aside. So I'll hit Command T, click in here, and write aside, hit the return key, and I've added the proper syntax for these. We have one more to do and we're done with the lesson today. So I can either click in here. When you click inside one of these divs and you see the orange, it allows you to change the content. What I want to do though, is I want to make sure that when I click on here, that it clicks on and it changes to blue instead of orange. I don't want to edit the content. I want to edit the div itself. So I don't want column. I want to make sure that I select not just the content. I want the entire row selected. So I'll select the row. Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit Command T. And this is going to be the correct syntax for this is footer. F-O-O-T-E-R. Hit the return key, and we have properly named all of them. So I can go ahead and I can select Command S to save. And this is where we're going to go or start with our next lesson. Now, let me go ahead just a little bit. I do have plenty of time here. So what I want to do though is to show you that when we go to the next lesson, we will be using what we constructed here, but they've already built it for us in the next lesson to use as a starting point. And so rather than use the one that we created here, we're going to use the one that they have created that should be correctly built so that when we begin to build upon it and add our own style sheet and that sort of thing, that it all works. So I'm going to go ahead and everything is saved. Let's pretend that it's next Tuesday and we're going to start to work again. So what I'll do next Tuesday is I'm going to go to Site and I'm going to go to Manage Sites again. I'm going to double click on the site that I created for our class. I'll click here. And let's go ahead and I'm going to go, instead of Lesson 5, I'm going to go back to my Dreamweaver folder and I'm going to select Lesson 6. I'll click Choose. And then under Advanced Settings, I'm going to go down here under Local Info. And I'm going to select the image folder that's contained inside, because you'll notice that we have the images that we need. But if I look in here, it's in the wrong folder. It's in Lesson 5. I need to go back to all the lessons, and I'll select now the one inside Lesson 6. So now I select the image folder inside it and click Choose. Now I can go ahead and select Save. Okay. I'm done. And now what I'll do up in the upper left-hand corner where I have my files, you'll notice that they have my layout. That's the one that we're going to start the lesson with. As I said, in many of these, they've kind of duplicated almost everything. They have a CSS folder. And if you're wondering, well, what do you mean? We're building our own CSS. Well, this is the Bootstrap CSS that you leave alone. The fonts that are being used, we have those in there. We have images that we will be using. Here's the fern and the stripes that we're going to be using in the header. And any JavaScript that is needed, okay, the Bootstrap JavaScript in order to make all of this work. So this will be the starting file that we use where it says my layout. It looks like the one that we just built. Okay. So now when we go up here, you can see the first row says column small 12. We go to the next one, and you can see that we have header. And this is the example that I was talking about. You can see the third row, but you don't see within it the columns within that. Well, under the main row in the DOM, I can twirl down and I can select the aside. I can select the article and I can select the right aside. And then we also have down here at the bottom, this one is the footer. Okay. So that's where we will begin our lesson next Tuesday. We're going to work on lesson 6. After we have completed lesson 7, I will show you how to go to create our own free hosting service. It's infinityfree.net. And when you've completed lesson 7, you're going to publish it using Infinity Free, and then you'll email me a link to that published page, and you'll get the full 20 points for lessons 1 through 7. Okay. Do we have any questions before we end today? This is just, I mean, it's a starting point. It's important. It seems simple, but it's important that you get it correct. And make sure that you use the proper syntax for each of these, that you don't use capital letters, for example, when you name some of these. They're put in the right location, the right location, that each of these are nested inside. I mean, all of these, you can see how these are nested. The body tag is the huge, everything is contained within the body tag for this. Then we have the next one, which is the div, the container that goes inside that. And then within that, we have our additional rows that might be selected, whatever. Okay. Yeah, it is a bit overwhelming. So, so a couple of questions that I have here. Yeah. So of all the lessons that we have done so far, the only one that you're going to publish is lesson 7. And when you publish lesson 7, I will assume that you have done lessons 1 through 6. It really is important that you do them. Otherwise, if you try to jump ahead and just do lesson 7 without doing the previous lessons, you're going to be lost. So it's a pretty good bet that if you can publish lesson 7 correctly, you have done lessons 1 through 6. And yes, it is a bit overwhelming, especially if you've never used Dreamweaver before, if you've never worked with HTML or CSS before. It is. So I'm hopeful that you have the textbook and you're following along with the textbook when you're doing the lesson. If not, then review the videotape that I will publish immediately after class. And if you continue to have questions, let me know. It's important that you get each section or each stage correct, that you do it correctly so that you can move forward. Because if you mess up with any one stage, it's going to have kind of a cascading effect. No pun intended with cascading style sheets. But it will have a cascade effect and it will cause problems in the future with future lessons. Okay. But let's see. And then the other question is, when you're doing lesson 7, yeah, the Wix website is a separate issue. That's separate. You will be building your own website at the end. That will be your third website that you'll be using Dreamweaver. But you have to understand more and have a little bit more knowledge about HTML and CSS in order to build your website in Dreamweaver. So in the meantime, I'm having you get acclimated to building websites using more of the WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. Online website builders like Wix. And then we'll be using something, as I said, we'll be using MobiRise. And by the time we're done with those, we'll be done with the lessons and you'll be able to do your own website in Dreamweaver. So yeah, Wix is a separate issue right now. Okie doke. So I'm going to go ahead and pause my recording. And pretty much say goodbye, unless I have more questions.